Well, today finds me in Pinkham Notch, New Hampshire. We're looking at some irises in bloom on Lost Pond. Well, this pond is not too lost right now. It's right by the highway, but maybe at one time it was. So New Hampshire 16 comes through Pinkham Notch. To the west of New Hampshire 16 is the Presidential Range, including Mount Washington in the center of your screen there. Zoom in a little bit. Still a little bit of snow left up there. And I think there'll be even more snow in the place we're going to hike to today, which is Tuckerman Ravine. I'm doing this hike today not because it's a lesser known hike, because it's definitely not, but to study the geology of the glacial Cirques on Mount Washington. C-I-R-Q-U-E is the spelling of Cirque. And these are large ravines that are rounded in shape. It's like somebody took an ice cream scoop and scooped a chunk of the mountain away. And they're steep on all sides and round in shape. So right now I think the one in the center of your screen is Huntington Ravine. And to the left of that, past the summit of Mount Washington, there's like a little nub of land there. Out of view from here is Tuckerman's Ravine, but we're going to get a view of it as we go up the Tuckerman's Ravine Trail. There's also some waterfalls on the way up and in the ravine itself, so I'm going to be looking at those. We'll be exploring the sides of the ravine where the trail leads us. There's the Lion's Head Trail, the Boot Spur Trail, and a few others that I don't remember the names of that we could check out as well. We'll just have a specific turnaround time. I'm guessing it's about 2 hours back down from the bottom of the ravine. It's about a 2,000 foot climb to the bottom of the ravine, an elevation change, and just a little over 2 miles, but with lots of rocks. So we'll have a specific turnaround time. We'll do as much looking around up there as we can. The weather forecast looks pretty good today. A 20% chance of a shower this afternoon, and that's only on the mountain itself. There's no forecast of any rain even in the notch here. So we're prepared. I've got snow pants, warm weather gear, and a rain suit, plus several layers to put on. But the high temperature in the notch today is supposed to be 72, and on top of Mount Washington, 58. So I'm prepared for a lot worse than that, mostly out of respect for all the efforts that's been made over the years to rescue stranded hikers on days where the weather just took a turn for the worse. So I'm prepared for that, and not expecting that. If it was a day where that was even a possibility, I would choose a hike that's lower in elevation because of that. Let's start walking up. Well, this is a very popular hike, and the trail is quite wide right here as we start up. About 5 minutes in, but a lot to see along the way here. Just took a short clip of that video of that mountain stream. This is the Ellis River. Glen Ellis Falls is downstream from here, just below Pinkham Notch. I think they're working on the trails there right now, so it's not open. That's supposed to be pretty impressive. That's more of a park your car and go for a short hike type of adventure. But this Ellis River, and we're going to also follow the Cutler River, which they split off in a few miles here, all the way up into Tuckerman's Ravine. And right after you cross that bridge, you see some stairs going to your left, excuse me, right, and just a few steps up to Crystal Cascades. Boy, this is pretty nice. That is awfully nice, and we got the lighting for it today. Flat light, but not too dim. Perfect for taking videos of waterfalls. Well, this is only moderately rocky. No scrambling required so far. About 3/4 of a mile into the Tuckerman Ravine trail. You can tell by the width. It gets herds of people, but there's a weekday. Most of the schools are still in session, but not for much longer, so I would expect next Monday this to be a lot busier. But it's this wide because of the amount of people that use this trail, which is one of the main routes to the top of Mount Washington if you want to do the whole hike, but also just to see the ravine and ski the ravine in the wintertime. The ravine is so steep it's prone to avalanche, so they don't advise skiing it during the midwinter, but not until things have stabilized in late winter. Late March, April, May is the most popular time to do this hike and ski. Plus you have plenty more daylight to make the trip. The wide trail continues. We've come about 1.7 miles. It's 2.5 miles to Hermit Lake, which is where the start of the ravine is. We'll talk about how that lake formed when we get there. This is the third bridge of this size. These are big enough to take a vehicle across. I don't know how they get up the trail with all those rocks. They might do it in the wintertime on a snowcat. This is the Cutler River tumbling down the mountain. So the snow up in Tuckerman Ravine would feed this stream, and there is still snow up there. You can see it from the highway. I don't think there's enough to have anybody be interested in hiking up there to ski the patches that are left, but you never know. We'll see when we get up there. Meanwhile, we're into all kinds of spruce trees now, spruce and balsam fir. It smells like a Christmas tree farm. So very aromatic. Well, we've come about 2.5 miles, climbed about 2,000 feet. None of it was very steep, just a lot of stones on the trail. No scrambling required. I'd never had to use my hands. And this is the Hermit Lake shelter. And then right behind it is Hermit Lake. Let's go back around this little side trail and take a look at the lake itself. And just a few steps from that shelter, the forest opens up a little. We can get a better look at this lake and the mountains. So here's Hermit Lake, maybe a couple acres in size. I can't tell how deep it is. And then yes, we got our eye on the prize. This is Tuckerman Ravine straight ahead of you. And there's a patch of snow, a couple patches of snow left over. I don't know if the trail gets near them or not, but I'm going to keep hiking. I've got time to keep exploring. Up into the ravine, you can kind of see that ice cream scoop shape that the glacier would have made. And there were glaciers in the other ravines around here too. So I trying to read up on this before this hike today. There's debate as to whether the glacier existed after the last ice age or the most recent ice age. If it persisted as an active glacier after that, or if it was there before that and made this cirque shape and melted right away after the last ice age. But often at the bottom of these cirques, where the ice pushes out material as it forms, the weight of the ice pushes material forward, just like with a regular continental glacier, and forms a small dam at the bottom of the ravine, and that would form what's called a tarn, T-A-R-N. Mount Washington Observatory had an article on this ravine, and they said this is considered a tarn here, but there's debate as to whether it formed after the most recent ice age or possibly the one before that, which was about 100,000 years ago. So a lot to see here. We're going to keep exploring for a few more hours and then turn around. About a 2-hour hike out, so I can stay till about 3:30 and still have time to do what I need to do after the hike today. And just a little further up, there's a smaller lake here. This one's more of a puddle, just a few feet deep. Probably not deep enough to even be considered a lake. So, but you can see even more of the U shape of that, where the ice cream scoop came in and took a big chunk of the mountain away. Real easy to see it right there. There's a big old waterfall up there, kind of behind the trees, but I'm going to zoom in as best I can. Right there. All right, well, stone steps and steeper climbing await you as you pass, after you pass Hermit Lake. It's quite rocky up here, huge boulder jumbles. Very impressive scenery. And the trees are getting much shorter, so you can kind of get a view everywhere just because you can see over a lot of them. I still wouldn't call this difficult hiking by White Mountain standards, but certainly steeper. Let's see if we can get a better, we're getting closer to that waterfall. Let's see if we can get a better look at it. And get even closer to the ravine here. You can see those snow fields. And yes, these mountains make their own weather, and 20% chance of a shower today. It looks like the top is going to be socked in pretty soon. But we're not going that high. We're 2,000 feet lower than that. We're at about 4,200 right here. And I'm going to go up as far as it makes sense, time-wise and terrain-wise. If I start hitting snow, it's time to turn around. There's that really large waterfall. We only can see the top half of it, but it's got to be 400 or 500 feet high. No real way to get to it. They don't want you going off trail up here because it's fragile vegetation. Take a look up at what's called the Boot Spur Trail. It goes along this ridge up here, and that's all above tree line. Because it's so exposed to the wind, the tree line can come down to almost where I'm standing in the windier location. So there's tree line is a moving target depending on how exposed the land is to the wind. You can even find small trees in the pockets between the rocks at over 5,000 feet. But they're only a few feet high. And even right here, these are black spruce right in front of us here. They're about 5-6 feet high. And there's some paper birch up here and some balsam fir. Getting a nice, pretty new growth on it. There might be a little red spruce in the mix here too, but usually the red spruce is not quite as cold hardy, so the black spruce takes over where the red spruce leaves off on these mountainsides in the Presidential Range. And the needles are shorter and a duller color. And the cones tend to stay on the trees. One right here is kind of dim to see it. There's cones that are on the tree. So if you're in a spruce forest, you see a lot of cones on the ground, it's probably a red spruce forest, and if you don't, it could be black spruce. So we'll keep on climbing and get closer to the snow fields. and then turn around. And I just sent the photo of this off to plant.net, and the answer is Labrador T, which is a rhododendron greenlandicum, I think is the botanical name. So there's a big bunch of flowers, kind of like the larger rhododendrons you find in the central and southern Appalachians, but this guy's much smaller. And all kinds of unique plants. As you get up to tree line and above, you start finding things that don't grow anywhere else. And I think I've got the vantage I need at a point where I could probably say I've reached my goal here. Again, you can really see the U shape of this cirque. So imagine a giant ice cream scoop coming out and just taking a bite out of the mountain. Of course, it doesn't all happen at once, but that's the shape you get. And you can see more snow now than you could from the bottom of the mountain. You only could see these upper snow fields on the way up. So hard to get an idea how big they are. There's one at the bottom there. So one of the reasons the snow accumulates so much in this cirque is there's no trees on top of the mountain and it's very windy. So the snow all blows from the west over top the mountain, and this faces east, so it collects in this hollow here and accumulates. We've got a waterfall coming down the head wall here. That's pretty neat in its own way, a ribbon of water. Well, this is spectacular mountain scenery, in my opinion. For not that difficult of a hike to get to the bottom of the Tuckerman Ravine here. This is where the actual ice cream scoop bottomed out, if you think of it that way. So we're about 4,500 feet. Yes, we climbed 2,500 feet in elevation, but none of it was that difficult. There were some steps back there. Compared to Avalanches Ravine I did a couple years ago and some other hikes around here, the footing was never that difficult and the steepness was never that difficult. And just from that Hermit Lake up, you can pretty much see the ridges the whole way up, and they're just impressive to look at, even on a cloudy day. And yes, the mountains make their own weather. This was supposed to be increasing sun today, but you know, the air condenses over a mountain range this size, and often the clouds will form and persist when everybody else is getting sun. So no chance of thunder today. If there was, I wouldn't have come up here, and definitely wouldn't go above tree line. So the chance of anything today was 20% chance of a brief shower in the early afternoon, and that's what we're getting. Just a sprinkle right now, not enough to make it unsafe. And I've got plenty of warm clothes and a full rain suit if needed. We'll take a little more time to look around here, then start heading back down. All right, now these are all stunted birch trees up here. Some of them have leaves, some don't. I was talking to some other hikers who are trying to figure out why. There's a lot of mud on the trail from weeks ago, but they may have had a flash flood that just literally tore the leaves off the trees while they were still coming out, or maybe a debris flow. Doesn't quite look like avalanche, but you never know. Well, we're definitely at the point I'm going to turn around now. I keep saying that, but this is where we have to turn around. The trail is not officially open because of this snow and ice up here, so I'm going to respect that and not go any further. But yes, these are the kinds of places where glaciers form. Northeast facing valleys that collect a lot of snow, mountains with a lot of wind, mountains that get a lot of natural snow. And you know, if this mountain was covered in trees to the summit, there wouldn't be as much snow blowing off the top, and maybe that would have never created the environment for a mountain glacier to form in here. This is an amazing place, spectacular scenery. Let's take one last look at this waterfall coming down, and that actually goes underneath what looks like a glacier there. A patch of dirty snow, and that dirty snow is probably 30 feet thick. You just can't tell from here. And I'm not going to go up any further to scale it off with anything, but this is a sublime place. Definitely day hike distance if you're used to hiking in the mountains, and as far as the steepness goes, only moderate in my opinion based on other hikes I've done. So yes, not too often you can have a snowball fight in June, and this is real snow. It's dirty snow, and in a few weeks it'll all be gone. Alrighty, well, it's just a very light drizzle, not enough to even put extra layers on for me right now. I'm staying plenty warm by moving. I am on my way back down, and the cloud ceiling is down to about 5,500 feet. It may go back up again. It may stay, you know, over the top quarter of the mountain or top 10% of the mountain. But these mountains make their own weather, and I don't think it's exaggerating that Mount Washington has the world's worst weather, at least for an area where people visit a lot. So, avalanches. I saw back there was a lot of trees with no leaves. And even here where they do have leaves, they're all leaning down the mountain. These are all paper birch trees here. And they're all growing sideways. If you get in a real windy location, the wind will cause that to happen. They'll grow in the direction of the prevailing wind. I have a feeling this is from repeated avalanches that have just bent them, and they never really grew straight again for long, and then they got bent again. And every tree here is leaning down the mountain, and this area does get avalanches, and they close it for skiing certain times a year and then reopen it, and you're always at your own risk. And pretty interesting to look at though. So paper birch is a tree that can grow way up the mountains. It's very hardy. You can find it almost at tree line, sometimes just a little shrub form. A little bit of balsam fir underneath these, but again, if they get knocked over by an avalanche, they're going to break. So they would never get any taller than the opportunity would allow. As soon as the next avalanche comes around, they'd be back to being a small tree. I'm going to take a minute to explain with some ice cream here how these glacial cirques form. Here's our Mount Washington. What I've done is taken this V-shaped spoon to create a V-shaped valley, which is the shape that the valleys normally have when they're formed by streams and not mountain glaciers. So I made that V-shaped valley with the V-shaped spoon. I just took the next spoon in the row of spoons here, the second one from the right, which is less V-shaped and more rounded. So as a mountain glacier starts to form in a V-shaped valley, it pushes on the edges of that valley with the weight of the ice, and some of the rocks and soil get transported downhill into the foot of the glacier, where that glacial lake was, the Tarn, T-A-R-N, which was Hermit Lake. And as that process continues, we start to see that ice cream shaped scooped valley in this ice cream, and also in the side of Mount Washington. We could see that clearly from the start of the hike as we looked up at Huntington Ravine, and we could see it clearly from several Vantages on the way up into Tuckerman's Ravine. So that was made with the third spoon from the right. And we'll stop with the largest spoon, the fourth one from the right, to show, you know, the maximum effect that the glaciers had on that valley. It started as a V-shaped valley with the small spoon. The V-shaped spoon became a much wider, deeper, and steeper valley. And so we have the Tuckerman's Ravine on one side of the mountain, right around the corner from it. We got your Huntington Ravine. And there's some other ones, I don't have the names memorized, on the other side of Mount Washington. And as a matter of fact, there's like 10 or 12 different glacial cirques on Mount Washington that are mapped. And some are bigger and steeper than others. And some are more complete, and some are still, you know, could be widened and deepened if there's another mountain glacier to be found. So what an amazing place to study this. We'll put the wraps on this hike in a few minutes and look forward to more of these adventures in the future. And we'll put the wraps on today's adventure. Got the National Geographic map in front of me here. There's a Mount Washington inset. It shows the trails in a little bit more detail, but there's a lot of trails in a small area here. I had no trouble navigating because there were signs at every interchange. But a larger map would probably be helpful. And they are for sale from the Appalachian Mountain Club. I just made do with this one. Our total trip was about 6 miles round trip, 2,400 feet to get up to the snowfields, and pretty much no climb on the way down. It was all downhill. There was no ups and downs. It was all up on the way up and all down on the way down. And this is showing a TUC as the Tuckerman Ravine Trail. TUC short for Tuckerman. And we started right down there at Lost Pond in Pinkham Notch, which is not really showing up on the map here, but it's right where the red line ends at Route 16, which is the orange line. And then zigzagged its way up, crossed the Cutler and Ellis Rivers 3 times. And we ended up by the Hermit Lake shelter. Went over and looked at Hermit Lake and then continued mostly uphill. That was the steeper part. Up to where it says Ravine there. That's about where I turned around. That was at the bottom of the snowfields at Tuckerman's Ravine. So I was up there about 8 hours, but you could do it in much less if you didn't stop as much as I did. But a very unique experience to see these glacial cirques in a part of the country where they're not that common.